That leads us right into our next panel on mixed use, sponsored by Ronnisch Construction. Let's meet Richard Barr. Richard leads the Economic Development Group at Honigman, where he has structured and successfully obtained approvals of some of the largest and smallest development projects in Detroit. The largest being the recently approved transformational brownfield plan, multiple tax abatements, and completion of the City of Detroit community benefit process for the $3 billion mixed-use project in Detroit's New Center area. Let's welcome Richard. Richard, I'll have you all the way down here. Yes, sir. Thank you. Jill Ferrari of Renovare Development. Jill has 27 years experience and is known in the development community for pursuing complex challenges as co-founder of Renovare Development, developing a series of mixed-use projects around the state centered on bringing much-needed missing middle housing with $100 million in projects throughout the state currently. Jill also leads efforts encouraging more female leaders to get involved into commercial real estate and serves as a mentor to many. Let's welcome Jill Ferrari. Please welcome John Hindo, president of the Boji Group. With decades of experience as a private practice attorney specializing in real estate and commercial transactions, John brings a wealth of knowledge to this panel. His expertise extends to real estate development, leasing, corporate formation, and navigating complex buy-sell agreements. John offers a unique perspective on the transformative power of public-private partnerships in community development. Let's welcome John Hindo. Frank Jarbou, principal and partner at Ronnisch Construction Group, boasts more than 2 decades experience as an esteemed commercial real estate developer and property manager. His expertise spans the acquisition, development, management, and leasing of commercial properties. Renowned for his innovative vision in new development, redevelopment, and distressed projects, Frank has cultivated relationships with brokers, tenants, general contractors, and civic associations. Let's welcome Frank Jarbou. Kevin Johnson is the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation and leads the city's inclusive economic development initiatives. Under his leadership, the DEGC focuses on job creation, capital investment, and small business growth with access, inclusion, and financial growth for all Detroiters at its core, and the winner of the Best Dressed Award in the room, Mr. Kevin Johnson. Terri Fitzpatrick serves as Senior Real Estate Advisor for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, leading site readiness efforts for the state of Michigan. Terri brings more than 35 years of corporate, tribal, and public sector commercial real estate experience to the MEDC. Here to talk about site readiness, public-private partnerships, and incentives, let's welcome Terri Fitzpatrick. Good morning, Terri. Good to see you. It's going to be fun. Thank you. Our moderator, R.J. King, editor of DBusiness magazine, covering companies in Metro Detroit and Michigan. He is also the author of multiple books and serves on several boards, 2 that he's most passionate about, Business Warriors and Beyond Basics. It's my honor to introduce to you our moderator of the session, R.J. King.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Mixed-use developments, we all know what they are, but putting them together is probably the most difficult of all over a one-off building or even a campus, because there's so many moving parts and usually a city council or a city commission involved. You've got potentially federal, state funding. So there's those hoops, local funding. So I thought we'd start with Richard and just go right down the panel. But Richard, you're part of a storied law firm. For as long as I've been covering real estate, since the mid-'90s, whenever somebody went up against you in a real estate matter, Honigman, you guys always won. So it was kind of predictable to see what would happen. After a year or two, you pick up on this, and So the whole book Cadillac thing and everything like that. But, what makes up a public-private partnership for a mixed-use development, and all the parties, and how do you maintain, accountability and transparency?
Well, thank you for the question, RJ, and good morning. Particularly in Detroit, but also across the state of Michigan, it's been an evolution. If you think back to the 90s and pre-recession, post-recession, continued recession, endless recession, whatever it was, the interests of government were often anybody that shows up who has a checkbook that has some money in there, we're happy to let them do what they want to do because thank God they're here, right? And for those that were involved in the 90s, things were relatively easy when it came to the politics of getting projects approved, whether it's entitlements or whether it's permits or whether it's incentives that existed at that time. But a lot of things that are priorities now weren't even thought about 20, 30 years ago in most communities. So the evolution, I think, has been driven both by supply and demand. Do we really need these projects? Do we really need these developers? And of course, the priorities of each community. And of course, no two communities are alike. A large majority of what I do personally is in Detroit. And I think back to projects that were approved 10 or 15 years ago when people were just starting to whisper about concepts such as inclusiveness and affordability and accessibility and the like. And those items have now become the first, second, and third things, not necessarily in that order, that come up in any project. Financeability, profit margins, and all that are still talked about, but a lot of the social, political issues have taken first chair on a lot of the projects. And those priorities, which are very legitimate, and you can't get around them. You have to decide that you're going to be a partner in that effort, and you're going to either agree with or sympathize and collaborate with the communities in trying to have them accomplish and be proud of the project and be there with you at the ribbon cutting. So that's driven a lot of the structure of the P3 concept, and what are their goals, what are your goals, what's your lender's goals going to be. So really it's a long-run collaboration shift that I think is very important. And for those of you that are relatively new to the business, it may seem impossible now, but it's not. But it's a matter of now putting yourself much more in the shoes of the other partners in the deal, much, much more than you had to do 20 years ago and 30 years ago.
Great, thank you, Richard. Jill, I know you have a lot of experience. What are some of the tools and organizations that you can bring in, and we'll talk about rural communities a little later, but just in general, for instance, I think we're on the board or still on the board of ULI Michigan, Urban Land Institute. There's an organization that could help. It's got experience all over the country and the world, but what are some of the groups that, when you're starting up a mixed-use project, or you've done 2 or 3 of them, what are some of the groups that can come in and help the developer and also enhance the development overall because of their involvement?
Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. But first I have to ask, my ex-boss is on this panel, my first boss in the law practice industry, and my ex-partner, who was a early investor in our company, is also on this stage. I'm just wondering if my ex-husband is in the audience. Just right? I mean, Dan?
I saw him in the hallway.
Right? Just really excited to be on the stage with all of these folks. To your question, partners are critical, especially in smaller communities, rural communities, non-MSA areas. We have partnered with local nonprofits. We have a partnership with Harbor Habitat in Benton Harbor. That partner is bringing $1 million in equity through Whirlpool Corporation, which would be very difficult for us to bring in, which paved the way for unsecured pre-development, access to local government relationships that we could not build on our own. In the Upper Peninsula, which I just drove back from last night, so if I'm a little slow in response, it's because it's a long drive from the UP. The local land bank is a partner in our deal. They are a 20% owner in the development. They brought access to additional economic development tools, which Richard will probably talk about at some point. But also, they brought county guarantees for pre-development. So I think forming partnerships, especially in areas where access to tools is limited, folks that don't have access to HUD entitlement funding or large foundations that are willing to invest in mixed use and housing, those partnerships are critical. And everything that we do is based in relationships and building those partnerships. So those projects do take longer. But the other part of your question was professional organizations, and I can't say enough about ULI. I hope that everyone in this room is a member of the Urban Land Institute. I've been a member of that organization since 1997, and every time we are trying to do something innovative, we are doing a model sustainable campus in Benton Harbor in partnership with Whirlpool, and we have tapped into that international network to find out what the best practices are for sustainability, and that's been just a huge asset to that deal. So thank you for asking.
Sure. John, I know Boji Group, they have their headquarters here in Birmingham and also Lansing, and obviously right down the street here, you guys are putting together the new RH store, very impressive. You've also did a big project in downtown Royal Oak. I guess working with the prospective city or community, what are some of the tips to help bring about a public-private partnership and a really good mixed-use development?
I think one of the things that you have to remember, one of the most important factors is it's a cooperative and collaborative effort. Unlike a private development where you might identify a property, identify a tenant, move quickly to develop the project you want, working with a municipality, it doesn't go that quickly. And it's because you have to be mindful of all the different stakeholders in the community. So whether it's the elected officials, the community interest groups, the neighborhood groups, the citizens, the business owners, and everyone else that has a vested interest in that community. And you really have to spend a lot of time understanding what their vision is for the community, what their objectives are for the community, and hopefully marry all of those variety of interests together to come up with a project that is beneficial to the community, a project that you feel is right and has support of the majority of the community. That process takes time. We always say that there's a fourth P in the private-public partnerships, and that's patience. And it's because this process doesn't happen overnight. It's not in a week, a month, 6 months. Sometimes it's a couple years. And in moving forward with that, the best outcomes in most municipalities is when you've engaged all these stakeholders early on in the process. The one thing you don't want to do is not to engage them. If you don't engage them, you're going to have fierce opposition at every council meeting, every commission meeting, and they will sidetrack your development. So I think that's one of the most critical components of private-public partnerships is remembering to work collaboratively with all of the stakeholders, take their interests into consideration, and then you can present a project that hopefully has the support of all the community.
Great, thank you. Frank, you are in the midst of building a mixed-use development, and how do you foresee or forecast changes that might come in midstream and sort of look at the project on a whole basis before you put the shovel in the ground so that you don't have something that emerges, a year later midstream and a huge cost overrun or whatever it might be? How do you do that planning up front?
RJ, thank you, and good morning. I think what you have to do is, a lot of what developers do, and a mistake is, they get the drawings done, get all their civil plans done, go through the entitlement process, and then, get it approved, and then we're just going to sub it out to 3GC, who comes in lower, we're going to give it to them. I think that's an archaic way of doing business today. We see more and more where we're part of the process, upfront early. So we can anticipate some of those delays, whether it be, equipment delays. Main distribution panels are a year out. RTUs, rooftop units, are still 6 months out. Backup generators are a year. But working with the municipality, working with the developer, gives the developer a little more, ammo to go back to the municipality and say, this just won't work. It works on a drawing, but it doesn't work in the field. And that's what we're seeing a lot of. So if any developer today and any type of project it is, I would say make your GC a partner. Don't look at it as mandatory. Bring them in early. Show them the plans. And what we like to do is what we tell everybody is show us the plans at 50%. You know, let us add value. You know, it doesn't cost you any money. Let us add value where we can do. Let us send it out to our subcontractors. So that way they can say, well, while they're speccing whatever they're speccing out, we can come back and say, let's change gears here a little bit. Whether you're going on a mixed-use project, all gas or electric, multiple different ways. So I would say get your GC involved much earlier, and you'll find that it'll save you in the long run.
Great, thank you. Kevin Johnson, you are probably the master of mixed-use developments in the city of Detroit and working with
And dressing.
Public-private partnerships. Maybe you could talk about how the whole Michigan Central came about. I know it's goes back 6 years now, but you know how that became really, I think, an example of really working forward and others really working with the community to maximize you know, the opportunities for someone to become a future startup, an engineer, or whatever it might be, and also helping the community groups and the rebuilding of Roosevelt Park and all those good things.
Well, obviously, we have you have a lot of projects that you called out, RJ, and I think, first, good morning. I do believe that the rule of the day and what you've heard coming across my panel colleagues is the strength of public-private partnerships is the way forward. I don't see us reverting back to one single owner dictating the terms of what is going to happen in the dirt that you think you own. I'm going to say that one more time. It's the dirt that you think you own when you do public-private partnerships. Even though you own it, there's people who have a say, and they can influence the success or failure of your development project. So to your question, RJ, around Michigan Central, it's so interesting that you raised that. This week is my 6th year as president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and 2 weeks after I got to town, I'm standing in front of what used to be the entry point, you know, our Ellis Island of Detroit, called the Michigan Central. And I remember Mr. Ford and Mayor Duggan, who you'll see later on today, we walk in there and I look around and I use some words that my mother would not be proud of based on what I saw. And so the whole idea of Michigan Central started well before, as you know, RJ, well before the announcement happened. There were a couple of attempts to redevelop Michigan Central. And I got to give Mayor Duggan credit, obviously, because he sold this concept to Bill Ford that this could become something different. Cycle up to every single public tool that you could think of was deployed to allow for Michigan Central to happen. If you just look up if you open a book, right, Terry, if you open a book, tax increment financing, tax abatements, brownfield redevelopment credits, everything that we had available, we put into that deal, and it allowed for a vision to be realized. So what are we doing now? We are taking the energy of New Lab, which is one of the adjacent facilities, where we're driving more innovation and entrepreneurship into that space with the hopes that there will be a unicorn or 2 or 4 or 6 that comes out of that development. And they decide that Michigan is the place they want to call home permanently, not run down to Austin, Texas, not run over to San Jose, California, but that they can realize every single opportunity that they could think of right here in Michigan. And we're building an infrastructure that will allow for that to happen, such as the University of Michigan's Innovation Center. Well, that will be a place where talent can come from, and also talent can be leveraged to create more opportunity. So this is going to be a different place, and it's different now. It's going to be even more different in 7 to 10 years. And I'm looking forward to participating in that. But that's the power of public-private partnerships, is you can realize further dreams beyond what you thought you could as you were an owner of the dirt that you thought you owned.
Right, and that U of M Innovation Center is being built kind of right behind the Fox Theater along Cass, and they have broken ground. I think it's 27 or 28 they're going to open. And just as a quick follow-up, Kevin, you know, there's been the announcement that the Detroit City FC has acquired the old Southwest Hospital. So basically, the train station, Michigan Central, is at Michigan and 14th, Michigan and 16th. And as you know, all the streets west of Woodward are numbered. So at Michigan and 20th is this hospital site. And now you're looking at a very, very early, what would be a public-private partnership for this new soccer stadium. So Kevin, in that thing, I know it's fairly early, but what are some of the things that you look for to come forward to make that really an amazing project that, you know, you've got Michigan Central and this future soccer stadium, and how do you make them all work?
I think it's going to be an anchor, certainly, of the type of people who will congregate and migrate to that part of Detroit. This is kind of our welcome to Wrexham moment. You guys watch Wrexham? This is kind of our welcome to Wrexham kind of opportunity, where the community is influencing everything. And so we see it as an anchor. We see it as an asset for the entire region, but most certainly it's going to be kind of villagey, in my opinion, about who will be there, the kind of shops and restaurants and housing opportunities that will be developed as a result of, and already being developed. We just opened the Brook a couple weeks ago when my good friend Cliff Brown started that. And I suspect that, you know, that's a 78-unit mixed-use development with affordable housing. We do need to talk about affordable housing, by the way. Sure. As an anchor for those types of folks who will migrate to Southwest Detroit. But we do see it as an anchor and an asset and a fire starter, I shouldn't say fire starter, as a facilitator of unique places where you can do things that you probably couldn't do in other places in and around the region.
Great, thank you. Terri, from the MEDC standpoint, how does the organization support both public-private partnerships and mixed-use developments? And, you know, what are some of the programs and how could people best access those?
Well, thank you for the question. Happy to be here today. On the partnership side, I think I'll start out with saying maybe everyone here is familiar or not with the governor's strategy to make it in Michigan that's based on projects, people, and places. And so we offer a variety of programs in the placemaking arena that are never funded enough. Recently we had the RAP program, the revitalization and placemaking, that came out of the ARP money, $100 million. The legislature came in with another $100 million for that. Both times there were more than $500 million in requests for that funding. At the program I administer, the Strategic Site Readiness Program, same thing, $100 million just deployed. Requests came in for almost $500 million. So when you're one with the checkbook, there's never really enough money in the account to use it. So someone spoke earlier about the legislative process and its impact on community development, placemaking, and it's really important to continue to educate the legislature at any opportunity that you have about how important these things are, because we know we also deal with a lot of site selectors who are looking for companies around the country and also in Canada and Mexico, and we know that some of the things they care most about are placemaking. They want a talent base, they want a site to be able to go to, and they want to attract talent by knowing that that people would want to live in the community. So there's a number of community development programs. There's also, you know, the brownfield credits. There's a community revitalization program for placemaking. And we partner all the time with our local and regional partners. So at the table, anybody comes in with a project, there's always local and potentially regional partners along with the state, and then the sub-agencies within those different governmental units, and sometimes the federal government too is involved. And then you might have many layers at the company or side, because you have you have the local municipality and then their consultants and contractors. So there's always, people say 3P, I think it's more like 3P squared, because there's always like so many, there's multiple parties of both private, public, consultants, all of that involved, that being able to manage that team with so many different parties involved, and often not being able to talk about a project until a certain period of time, make these things complicated and ripe for criticism from the public. So different people talked about the communications process, and that's early on something that we look at when we're working on a big project. But you can communicate in every way that's legally required if there's a rezoning or there's any kind of approval or a master plan change that requires public comment. But they often won't say anything until the actual project's there. And then when the project's there, the media is not typically friendly to the projects, and they conflate public comment with citizen resident. So we can have citizens in a community very strongly supportive of a project, but the media picks up on public comment that now often comes in virtually from across the country as if it's the sentiment of the residents, which is really unfortunate. So, I would say there's not much that the state does in any kind of asset development that isn't a public-private partnership. It might not be documented as such, but the controls are there. Contractually, the close are there. They're often much more visible than if you didn't have that relationship or their partnership. So accountability and transparency is built into the process, and you just hope that you have a strong enough community to fight the backlash that will come, that is not only anti-development, anti-business development right now in Michigan, but across the country. It's a very organized effort across the country to stop development as much as possible. And maybe that will change after the election, and maybe not.
And how best could people access the tools that the MEDC offers?
MichiganBusiness.org is our website, and everything's available on there through search, or anyone can contact me and I can direct you to the right person who covers your region. Michigan's broken up into 10 regions, and there are representatives from the MEDC for both the community development and business development side that I can put you in contact with as well.
And Kevin, how about from your standpoint, how could people access the DEGC best?
I would tell you to call me, but I don't want to do that. So go to www.degc.org. There is a easy, navigable drop down that gives you all of the tools that we make available. We work very, very closely with MEDC. So some of the programs that Terri mentioned, you can actually find on our website as well. So if you go to www.degc.org, that will get you. And I am specific to the city of Detroit. So don't text me about what's happening, over where Restoration Hardware is, where my man's doing a deal, because I can't help you. Plus, that's a cool development, by the way. Yeah, reminds me of the one in Atlanta. Anyway, so that is really for the city of Detroit.
Well, you got to get them to bring one downtown.
I'm working on it.
Richard, what are some of the latest tools to facilitate and accelerate the development and really inclusion of affordable housing more and more? As you read about these projects in communities, there's usually a 20% affordable rate housing into the project. How is that determined, and what are some of the latest tools and laws and regulations that have helped bring this about and to make these Michigan projects more inclusive?
I want to answer that in two parts. First, I want to underscore and confess that what I just heard about communication and engagement with the community is much more important than I thought it was going to be. 5 or 6 or 7 years ago when some of Kevin's staff said, you've got to get the neighborhood support. I was like, oh, come on, another roadblock, government's here to help us, yeah, sure. It was 100% correct, and perhaps understated at that time. Right now, the first person that I would hire, the first thing I would do in a project is a communications and community engagement person. At the end of the day, whether it's Detroit or whether it's Royal Oak or whether it's Birmingham or whether it's anywhere else right now, it's going to be the community who's going to be getting the city council or the township board or the planning commission uneasy. And the sooner you engage in that soft part of the process, the better. And most people push back and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't even have my plans. I don't have my financing, I don't have it, whatever. But when word gets out, and Zoom gets working, and Facebook gets working, and Twitter gets working, if you lose control of it, you're way down. You're down 0-2 in the bottom of the ninth. So, and I will confess, and I told Kevin's people years ago, give me a break. I don't really need 6 support letters. And they said, how about 16? And they were so right. So Kevin, kudos to your people, and Terri, your people as well, who were ahead of the curve, much as I didn't want to admit it back then, and now I recognize it. If there's one takeaway today, hear what most of us have been saying. Much as you might not want to deal with the community, they can become your ally. And when they see what's in it for them, they're much more important than a tax abatement. But getting back to your question, as some of you know, the governor has established affordable housing and workforce housing, attainable housing, housing for anybody as a priority in Michigan. Supply and demand has caught up, but certainly increasing costs that we all know about have taken over and made it very difficult. Interest rates, of course, make housing itself not necessarily more valuable, but certainly more expensive when it comes down to making your payment. So the tools that the state has right now are generally what has been out there, but there have been some additional programs that MISHTA had. Unfortunately, most of those were ARPA funded or funded with appropriations that have run out. So we're hoping the legislature renews or replaces some of those project funding tools. Between that and the Population Council, there's a lot of attention at the state level to getting more affordable housing, workforce housing alike at almost any cost because of a widely held belief that we need that in this state. My kids, unfortunately, have all moved away and they pay rent that's double or triple or 3 or 4 times what the rents are in Detroit. And I keep saying to them, come on back. You can afford a $500,000 house here. You can't even get a 1,000-foot condo in New York for that price. So there's a focus here that I think is appropriate in terms of how do we get housing that's affordable. So there's a combination of the tax abatements that have been out there, frankly not very well deployed, not very frequently deployed, but I think needs to be attended to much more than has been in the past. There is a recent change in the state law to the law that allows pilot ordinances at a local level where you can negotiate a property tax or payment for rental housing in any community in the state as long as it's deemed affordable with rents of under 120% of AMI, which can be substantial. You hear these numbers, you hear these letters. 120% of AMI for a studio is about $2,000 a month. So most of you would be happy to get $2,000 a month for a studio. So it's not like for those people. This might be what your target market actually is. So that tool is just rolling out in a few communities. The legislature authorized it about 18 months ago, and things get studied and talked about and eventually implemented. There are recent amendments to the Brownfield law to create what's called housing TIF. That allow a very expanded group of costs to become reimbursable from future property taxes generated by the project. And those might be anywhere from a substantial portion of the rehabilitation costs for a project to what's called housing subsidy. So there might be a rent subsidy that is offered, often in response to city requirements to have 20% of the units affordable at 80% of AMI or other combinations. Those can now be subsidized through a brownfield plan. And also purchase price reductions for sale housing to get the sale prices on houses to be affordable to not just those that make $500,000, but those that make $200,000. And as everybody in this room knows, when interest rates went up from 2 or 3% to 6% or 8%, we all know what happened to the affordability of houses and how difficult it is to be able to get people to be able to afford a house. So it's the combination of all those, the creative thinking, the sitting down with the DEGCs and the MEDCs and the communities other than those that we need in the next year. The governor's all about it. Michigan's all about it. And I think the legislature, at least currently, is all about it. So the opportunity's there. I'm not sure how long the window will be open. Might have to do a lot with the election coming up in November. But the creative combinations, I think, are the tool for the future, at least for the near future in Michigan.
Thank you. Joe, getting back to the rural communities, I think most people in this room have experience with urban mixed-use developments and how those are put together. But in rural communities, what are you seeing and what's been popular? And I would think those city hall meetings and those types of things are pretty packed. Probably the whole town's there, right?
Yes. And first, I want to go back to something that Richard said about affordable housing, because it is definitely a critical issue in a lot of rural communities. We're seeing across the state that there is a agreement in the need for a certain rent range. They're looking at the workforce that they need, and they're saying, we need service workers. We need retail workers. These are seasonal towns. And the other priority is healthcare workers, because these are aging populations, right? Towns with folks where 50% of their population is 55 and older, they all want to age in place. They don't want to go to nursing homes. They don't want to take that path. They really want to age in place. So you need healthcare workers. These are folks that make $15 to $25 an hour. And so there's slowly an agreement on the rents that are necessary. But then when you try to assign that rent range to a subsidy, to a tool, like the low-income housing tax credit, oh, no. We don't want those people in our community. But that's the rent range that you just described. This is your workforce. The stigma around low-income housing is a huge barrier in the state of Michigan and nationally. We know this. We need a campaign to help people understand that Michigan's workforce is low income. We have a huge talent attraction effort, which is exactly what the state needs, that the governor's leading. But we also have a tremendous need to house that percentage of the workforce that is driving our smaller towns and communities. It's absolutely critical. So bringing LIHTC into small towns is very difficult. Layering that, the Missing Middle program that MSHDA rolled out within the last couple of years has been successful. We have 3 of those awards. It's a very easy program to work with. And the transformational brownfield program is something that seasonal towns, smaller towns are starting to understand, starting to utilize. And with the expansion of the program to capture additional taxes, we testified at the State Economic Development Committee for the Senate over the summer to push for this. Smaller towns are starting to understand that these tools are exactly what they need to drive the development they need for their towns. So I think a lot of the tools that are coming down, like the changes in transformational, housing TIF is going to be essential for towns where you don't have a lot of traditional brownfield eligible activities. You have greenfield sites, but you also can't make your deals pencil. So we have a 48-unit single-family for-sale deal in Marquette Township. Strong community, strong sales, but we have a town that has set a priority for workforce. That means lower sales prices. So housing TIF is a critical tool for a project like that. So I think everything that Richard mentioned can be used in some of these rural towns. It's just a little bit harder to package, and you need those partnerships to make it work.
Great, thank you. John and Frank, from your businesses, when you're starting out a public-private partnership, a mixed-use development, what's the team you form internally? Do you right away set up a point person? And who's the team that complements that person in bringing this project to fruition?
So oftentimes, besides our own internal team, our own staff, we hire architects, engineers, and experts in the community. A lot of times we look for local companies. So if we're working in a specific community, i.e. Royal Oak, we'll look for the local architects, local engineers. But when you're engaged in a public-private partnership, you have to look beyond the normal consultants that you bring into every project. A lot of times when you're going into a community, you need to kind of understand the community, understand the lay of the land, and you might want to hire experts that are familiar with the community, whether that's an attorney, a former council member, a former mayor, and help them to guide you and navigate throughout the process. So when you're engaged in a private-public partnership, there's more consultants that you're bringing in other than just your normal development team. Furthermore, when you're dealing with the public, a lot of times you're dealing with other aspects, as Richard would tell you. Sometimes you have bond councils, you have municipal financing, and a slew of other consultants that you don't normally engage with in traditional development.
And Frank, how about you? When inside your company, what do you do?
So what we do typically, and John, great points. We would, get the stakeholders together, get everybody, and everybody get on the same page. You got to develop a game plan first, whether it be, the consultants, the architect, the owner, however it is. Get all the input together, because when you have a public partnership in that magnitude, and there's so many eyes on you, the same message, whether they're talking to me or they're talking to John or whoever it is, it has to be the same message and what you're trying to accomplish. So I say that, you spearhead it, put it together, and, another aspect that I could add on to what John said was, get that person that's out there that's relatively available to answer questions, to bring in the questions and say, maybe they don't have the answer today, but they can go back to the team and say, I can get you that answer, and I can maybe get you that meeting with whoever you want to meet with. So, maybe that, public person that's out there answering the day-to-day questions.
Great, thank you. And Kevin and Terri, when somebody, first comes to you, maybe they've had some conversations initially, but when they first come to you and literally sort of lay the plan in front of you for a brand new mixed-use project in Detroit or Michigan, what do you like to see? I mean, what kind of steps and checks should they have done before they, when they first lay down that plan that you want to see, like, yes, we've engaged the community, yes, we've gotten our financing, yes, we've, what are those types of things that you're looking for?
Everything that Richard has said, that Jill has said, we love to see all of that up front. It really accelerates our ability to respond to you in an efficient and effective manner. One of the things that our organization, we pride ourselves on is, unlike, and I don't have any issues with city because they help fund our organization, but we try to move at the speed of market. And that's a distinct difference in certain places, in certain city governments. They don't move at the speed of market. And we know that there's a critical window as developers that you have to meet through your financing mechanisms, your capital stack, when can you spend the money, when can you get in the ground. So we try to move at that level of speed. So when you present your team to us, as well as your term sheet, so to answer your question, I'd love to see your term sheet, and how you're gonna fund this project. If you have done outreach, that's less work that we have to help you do. So we're really a consultant to developers. When it's all said and done, we really are your consultant that you don't pay for. Mm-hmm. And that gives you some comfort. When you walk into our door, we're automatically under NDA. We set that up a long time ago. I set that up. If a project comes to you from a developer, you are under NDA whether you signed it or not. That gives you a lot of comfort knowing that we're not squawking out about what your deal is. That's what we want to see, as much of the upfront work that you can do. And if you don't know what to do, call us, and we'll tell you what to do to get that done quickly.
Sure, thank you. And Terri, from your perspective, when you're first learning about a project, and maybe the MEDC, Michigan in general, is going to support it, what do you like to see?
Well, in addition to what Kevin just said is, I want to see that they've done their due diligence. We have a lot of projects come forward, and they present a budget, or they haven't done any title work, they haven't done a phase one, they say there's demolition needed, but they haven't done a hazmat study, so they don't really have an idea of what their project budget is. And like Kevin said, we do act as a consultant a lot to go through a list of due diligence items to make sure that all that stuff is done before they ever come to us. But we get really a lot of projects that have done no physical or legal due diligence on the site before it comes to us, and so the budget to me is meaningless. Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be dream killers, but I kind of can kill your dream. Don't want to, but we kind of can kill it, because once we tell you all the things that you have to do, particularly if you're inexperienced, you tend to kind of walk away and say, this is just too damn much stuff. I'm going to go somewhere else. And then you go somewhere else and they tell you the same thing, just maybe not as blunt as our group would tell you. But that's an important distinction, that due diligence is important, and if you don't know what to do, we will help you.
And I would say it's especially important now because of what construction costs have done in the last few years. There's so many deals that are going back to the Strategic Fund Board for amendment because of those cost increases. And there's some deal fatigue now with the board on deals that keep having to go back. So the better well packaged something when it comes through the door, and you have some certainty about numbers that you're dealing with, the more likely it's going to go forward.
Okay, great. And then on sort of the flip side, Kevin, and anybody else can jump in on this. The City of Detroit puts out an RFP. You go through the process, and the things are due July 15th or whatever it might be. What are you looking for in those submittals that kind of put that at the top of the pile?
Well, obviously it really depends on the site that we are trying to get out to the market, and we will look for creativity. We will look for your ability to get the project financed. We will look at your team that you will assemble, any deal experience you have. We factor that in. We try to score that. We do have certain RFPs that we want for newer developers. We just don't want the same 3 development companies coming every time, because it's an unfair advantage that they may have. So we do kind of set certain projects to the side for developers that don't have as much experience as others. And we bring those out. We set them in front of our team. We sit them in front of the mayor. We say, Mayor, we think that this is the one, and they meet all these criteria. He gives us some guidance on that, and then we go back out and we award the RFP. It's not some sinister plot to pick certain developers, even though some of them show up a little bit more than others. But we really try to be fair. We not try to be. We are fair in that process.
Great, thank you. And we have a minute left, and Richard, I don't know if you can do it, but there's expansion of the NEZ program, neighborhood enterprise zones, that would apply to affordable housing. How do you sort of see that working?
About a year and a half ago, the legislature passed a series of bills trying to bring more affordable and attainable and workforce housing to the communities. The most important part was to open up the NEZ program to not just the so-called core communities that exist, and there are quite a few that are core, but not always the ones you want, and instead say that any community could give an abatement if the project had affordable housing. That has been kind of slow in rolling out to the communities, but it's there. And like most things, it takes a year or two until the word gets around and everybody gets comfortable and they see the first one did it. So there were a set of companion bills, all of which were intended to try to lower the property tax burden, which we know is amongst the highest around in a lot of communities, not just Detroit, which doesn't shy away from admitting it, but many others. And at the end of the day, if we can bring down the tax burden, we increase the affordability of the houses, both from a financeability standpoint and from a borrowing standpoint. It's your PITI. We all know what those letters mean. If we can bring down the taxes, we make it more affordable, which means more people move in, either rental or for sale.
Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking this all-star panel for their presentation.